Now, tu me fais signe quand c'est bon.
Akegera is a trio with an original instrumentation, so trombone, drums, vibraphone and marimba. A trio without a bass. As far as we know, in this regard, it's unique. Here we're lucky enough to have this opportunity to do this first creative residency and to work in collaboration with the sound engineers and all the Flux team. We're here with them. They're in the process of evolving their equipment whilst we evolve the way we play. It's a real interaction. The meeting between Akegera, Flux and Spat will create a starting point, and perhaps we'll be the first, but I hope that people soon realise that it's easy. And in a modest fashion, we will have been at the origin of something that could perhaps become universal. The difficulty for Akegera is to create a show around their album, which was created as a trio, and to try to project into the future, to say to ourselves, how are we going to be able to use this technology? This is jazz, therefore we don't have a production with a fabulous touring rig where we can impose a technical solution, but rather the opposite, where we must adapt to the different circumstances. And so it's here that our programme, the Spat Revolution, is really welcome because it's capable of adapting to everything. So we began by bringing our expertise with regards to questions such as, what is immersion when using speakers? How can we set it up with relative ease? And then finally, how can we play with it? It's necessary to keep up with the project from the word go. Perhaps tomorrow there'll be other things, there'll certainly be other things, even more ambitious projects perhaps, but to begin with, the idea was to see how this can work, how can we begin? So we weren't going to take out a profusion of speakers in such a small venue. We needed something more adapted to accompany them. But once again, it's about doing something viable. Already in doing nothing more than relatively simple things, we realise that it demands a great deal of effort and equipment and a lot of setting up and so on. My role during this residency was to establish the design brief in order to render this project feasible. The principal idea of this project was to conceive an installation that was lightweight, both in terms of cost and equipment, and that it be easily transportable in the context of a tour. I like to consider this system in two parts. First is the part of the mixing desk where we retrieve and treat the onstage sources before sending them to the Spat Revolution, and then finally in Spat we decide on the disposition of the sound and the general orientation of the aesthetics, as well as the choice of colours that we wish to apply. My role was more one of technical support, behind the mixing desk a little, on the Spat, as well as on the Lima interface, which enables one to control the Spat over distances from an iPad. So on the Lima we worked in pairs with Gail, him developing new things on the Spat Revolution, while I applied what he was developing directly onto the Lima interface. So this was for Victor, enabling him to simplify his workload when using Spat, as having an additional tactile interface makes an enormous difference from, say, having just a mouse, whilst adapting to his needs, if he wants bigger buttons, different functions, etc. There were many ideas that came from both the sound engineers and the Flux team that over the next few weeks and months will be further developed. These will enable live engineers to be a lot more efficient and to have a much more complete interface. What was really interesting about this project was the fact that we ourselves are in the process of constructing the tools. So we get attached to seeing how the sound engineer must adapt in order to follow the musicians, and vice versa as we put the tools in place. So we're there on the sidelines, adding functions, testing. It's great.
Well, and I think we are live. Are we live? Arsène, tell me we are live. Arsène, our community manager, that's on the other side there, checking on me, checking on that stream. Thank you, everyone, for joining today, July 5th, for this Pro Tools integration webinar. Another one of those that we wanted to do for the longest time. There's actually a series. There's a second one. It's actually not a complete series. There's a second one coming. So my name is Hugo here, joining you guys from Montreal, live in Montreal from the studio, the Flux studio, where we've been doing these webinars. And thanks everyone for joining. 9 a.m. in LA on the West Coast, here on Eastern Time, 12. And we've got our friends in Europe, 6 p.m. that just joined. And yes, part of actually online is most probably, you know, Nicolas and Gael are actually founder, lead developer, and other members of the team, which will be picking up some, some of the questions. So feel free to drop questions. We have an official Q&A at the end, but some questions will be answered on the way. So yeah, that's it. That's all. We are ready to attack this. And there's quite a bit of content, but today's goal was actually to make the session very simple. We'll actually go on the simple steps of understanding this integration and how we can make audio quite rapidly. And the next following webinar will kind of get deeper into the subject of optimizing the workflow really. We've started with the video with or the little streaming with the video of Akagera, and I actually chose this for a few reasons. Number one, it was one of the great projects that we had a chance to work on. It actually dates a few years back as we were developing and advancing the tool in live reproduction. But I actually chose this because we're actually going to be using these tracks just for fun to play around, kind of, keeping the music the same as this little introduction. So this is why I picked this one today. I like to change as well once in a while. Okay, let's actually get going and stop talking for a second and go on with our Pro Tools integration webinar of the day. So as I was saying, my name is Hugo Larin. I am the, I do what? I do many things. And one of the things I do is like to evangelize and be the person online to actually talk about what we've got going at Flux. So yeah, and Pro Tools, no secret, right? It is a de facto in post-production, still de facto, in Dolby Atmos production, although other workstations have been growing around that space. The Pro Tools is a no-brainer. It's something that we cherish a lot. You can actually see an Avid S6L console behind us. We've been deeply working on this integration since the get-go, since the beginning of the Spat Revolution project. Okay, so let's actually move on and get into the subject of the day. So, Spat Revolution Immersive Audio Engine. Well, I guess the first question would be, for the people that are new to the conversation, I guess the first question could be, well, what is, Spat Revolution? And we're just going to go deeply and kind of highlight a few things. The goal is not obviously, just to focus on Spat Revolution, but, and all the possibilities, because we'll be here for an hour or two, or maybe more, but really to kind of highlight a few things and really talk about integration aspects. So, what is Spat Revolution Immersive Engine for the ones that are new to the conversation? It is an object-oriented spatial audio tool, so immersive audio tool, rendering, whatever you want to call it. It is a tool that to mix and to render. And a few interesting things in the model, right? Some of you may be familiar with Dolby Atmos and some panning of objects, which is ultimately object-oriented. But Spat goes kind of a bit deeper with a few unique concepts. One of them is what we call perceptual mixing, and that means that the object lives in the space, and we can actually manipulate some of the perceptual factors, parameters, how we hear things, right? So this comes from studies from the EarCam. One of those interesting concepts is the concept of distance attenuation. Why are we still using faders while we can actually just move the object to get some natural attenuation, on the amplitude, but beyond this, even to the extent of air absorption simulation. Yes, if we move a source further away to make it real, we should actually air absorb, so EQ 10K and down. So this is part of the model, and that's where it becomes very interesting for Dolby content creation and others, for that matter of fact. So that is kind of the first thing to highlight on the product itself. And beyond, well, the perceptual mixing cannot necessarily be detached to this beautiful possibility, which is the reverb engine for crafting, for creating space, depth. And as we are mixing, being for whatever deliverable in immersive, one of the challenges, how do we deal with reverb? Can we take a stereo reverb and try to put some, a stereo reverb here and a stereo there? And some of the people in Dolby Atmos production have many tricks. There's some multi-channel reverbs, but here is really tying all this together, where those sources are living in an acoustic space, and then you're using the reverb engine to kind of build and all attach this attenuation model, kind of playing a dry wet, if you want. The source is further away, you hear more of the room. So very unique, and this is kind of what we're going to be listening today at the same time. And this is what is the core of Spat Revolution beyond just panning. Is an actual mixing, and we call it perceptual mixing. So object-based and perceptual mixing. Now, okay, we want to create all this. We may not be with the loudspeaker setup. We may be on the plane. We're all on the go. We're starting to create content. So a big portion of that is the ability to virtualize production. We call this binaural audio. You've heard about binaural audio, but it's the ability to do binaural audio synthesis from the mixing software, or to actually virtualize loudspeaker arrangement, virtualize my monitoring environment, my 714, my 712, my bed, my whatever loudspeaker format. So part of that foundation. Moving on, well then, we obviously going to be wanting to render, to deliver, to print, to bake, all these beautiful words. I say render, this is in real time. We're not talking about a rendering process per se, but in real time deliver with various techniques, because we have a load of techniques, but some of the things that we can do is actually be able to bake your audio, your beds for Dolby Atmos deliverable. Definitely one of those. Another aspect of this is being able to bake the audio for a specific arrangement that is not a standard, let's call it, standard Dolby arrangement or other standard formats you may be used to. And that means that any speaker arrangement is possible, right? You got to a theatrical production to do. You've got 20, 30 speakers, you position them, choose the technique, and you obviously could use Spat to create this content, bake it, print it, and then use it later to play out directly to the loudspeaker. So in the content creation concept in this case. Well, and then if you're not in the content creation, you're more to deploy live. Well, at the same time, Spat is all about real time. You've seen this video with Akagera. This was actually used in the live, in a live scenario. It was not just content. It was content creation, preparation, all the way to the actual deployment itself on a custom loudspeaker arrangement, right? So yeah, that gives you kind of an idea in a nutshell of what Spat Revolution is all about. These use cases, I started to mention them. Well, for mixing Dolby Atmos production, no doubt about this. Now, we're not dealing with the actual objects of Dolby per se. The objects are the Spat objects. But what we are able to do is actually to craft some beds. Now, I mentioned 712 and beyond for the ones that are familiar with the Dolby Atmos conversation to understand one thing. The bed in Pro Tools, or actually I should say in a Dolby renderer, is always, for the moment anyway, that we know, limited to 712. Now, many people around Dolby Atmos production have actually moved beyond this and actually doing beds as objects. This is not the conversation of the day, but this is obviously the possibility. You can use Spat to create a 916, for example, or even something bigger than this arrangement-wise, and declare those as static objects in the Dolby content creation. I say 712 and beyond, yes, thanks to Pro Tools 23.6 that just released, now support wider tracks, 916 with presets for Atmos. Again, not the conversation of today, but just to kind of, bring the fact that Spat is a great tool for making those beds with reverb engine, with their perceptual mixing, and then you'll be able to later declare to Dolby Atmos a renderer for a Dolby Atmos delivery at this point. Then creating content for immersive audio installation, right? This is popping everywhere. Sound installation, museum, sound arts. Yeah, the list goes on and on and on without talking about, yeah, the list could go on. Planetariums, domes, it's experiences, various experiences, in entertainment. It's going everywhere. So what we can actually do there is do custom speaker arrangement. I say up to 128. Well, these limits are currently 128 is kind of the number, but there's in theory no limit there. Computers becomes a limit at one point, and we do this with various techniques. Now, delivering binaural is another one, right? If you need to create some binaural audio content that will be actual played out later, or if you want to be doing your music directly in binaural to upload it on a platform that is not Atmos, such as Spotify, so I have a binaural file, definitely possible there. And we deal with ambisonic as well for people that are more into the VR. Same story there. Create those ambisonic scenes that can be later used in a VR environment, for example, or other ambisonic type deliverable possibilities. And last but not least, well, yes, pre-production, of a live show. We're preparing a live show. You're in studio, right? So you're using Spat and the playback of choice. It could be Pro Tools to play your audio, prepare those scenes, which will later actually get used, down the line. Similar to Akagera, this is kind of what they did. You kind of saw in the video at the beginning the preparation in studio, which was, the recording, playing it back with Spat, and so on and so forth. Good. Avid Pro Tools integration, what's involved there? Well, basically, we're going to be inserting Spat Revolution to your workstation, right? That's an actual insert mode, which we'll look at in 2 seconds. It'll be both application running on a single machine in those cases. And we'll be sending the tracks, your audio tracks, to Spat as source or objects. We call them sources. They're objects, so all the same. So that's why I mentioned sources or object for actual mixing. So send a track to actual Spat for mixing. And then what we're doing is we're returning to the actual Pro Tools channel base, so all these beds, all these arrangements that we want, binaural audio, ambisonic, and then we can actually print and or potentially monitor if it's a channel base or binaural monitor to headphones and so on and so forth. Important to mention that sources can be kind of whatever in the sense that they can be mono, they can be obviously stereo, but they can be multi-channel as well. So, you can actually take a multi-channel audio file, bring it into Spat, not necessarily only a mono source. And ambisonic is possible as well. We're not going to dive into this today, but ambisonic is possible. We can do ambisonic transcoding as well for the ones that are interested on the subject. Then the integration is what? Well, we want to access those parameters. We can obviously use the mouse to do so with Spat Revolution, but ultimately we're going to be wanting to automate those. So these plugins that we'll talk about today are the integration part that gives you all the parameters, pass them basically to Pro Tools for the automation, as simple as this. And typical automation, works exactly like any automation you may have done in the future, in the past, sorry. And then to actually control, well, then mapping to control surfaces, MIDI control surfaces, Avid control. I am using Yukon right in front of me. I might pop it up on screen a bit, a bit later. We actually are page mapping all these parameters for access to Avid control, so Yukon, so S3, S6, and all the other family. And last but not least, you can decide to control with the Spat remote. There is an application, or I should say a web server solution, where you can use an iPad, control Spat objects, which ultimately are speaking with Pro Tools, so the automation gets written. It becomes kind of an all ecosystem of production. Okay, whoops, sorry for this. I need to get my face out for this. So, okay, just briefly, I've talked about insert, and sometimes, people are a bit confused. Insert workflow inline. On the left side is what I call an insert, basically, right? The playback, record, the Pro Tools in this case, send the audio tracks, and we return the render, the output, the beds, what we need to print. So this, they're kind of tying together. Where a typical inline scenario, you have the playback system feeding the rendering engineer, in this case, the Spat Revolution Immersive engine, and then you can attack directly the system. That's what we do in live. So you could be doing that, that inline type workflow, but then obviously how do you print becomes the question. So that's why today we're focusing on an insert. We're inserting, them together. They're living all happily as a big family. Let's talk about the audio routing briefly. So we have an idea of what's going on. Single computer, completely possible. This is what we're going to be today. We're focusing on single computer. And we're doing this how? Well, we're going to be sending and returning the audio with a function that's called local audio path. It's part of the plugin. So the plugin that's there to map the controls is there as well to pass the audio. Boom, boom, send, return. As simple as this, okay? So this is what we're going to be focusing on today. In the next webinar, we'll be talking about bridge audio device in macOS and how we can use other advanced possibilities in Pro Tools. Aux.io, which was released in 22.9, is one of them. We're covering this in the next webinar, so hang tight for that one if you are interested. Now, dual computer is possible and recommended for larger session. You got 100 objects. You've got a bunch of video, a lot of plugins on your session. Yes, the dual computer offloading resources is a good strategy, but for single computer and for today's performance, we could do quite a bit without necessarily involving a second computer. But yeah, that's all possible. And in this case, we're using standard core audio as your driver. Windows user may, revert, to dual computer setups in some cases, because bridging audio devices in Windows is not something that exists as common anyway. And then ultimately, what we're going to be doing for the audio routing, well, your monitoring will be directly coming from Pro Tools and the playback engine, whatever that is. That's an HDX, that's, directly an audio interface of whatever. You're going to be using this to monitor, right? So in this particular case, in this insert mode, yeah, Spat is not outputting anything per se on hardware audio device. It's returning it to the DAW. Makes sense? I think this is quite simple. Let's actually look at something here that will give us kind of an idea of this insertion, and we're actually going to do it live together. Simple session, right? We've got some audio tracks, audio 1, 2, 3, and 4. They could be mono, stereo, LCR, ambisonic. They can be multi-channel. But what I want you to understanding is the concept is simple. These tracks that you were routing to a master bus, to your mix, to your stereo mix, are basically keeping that same patch, right? They're still feeding, but what we're going to be doing is this plugging the Spat send, and on the master, the mix, the Spat return, will basically extract the audio and return and replace the content of the master, the mix, by the Spat audio, right? As simple as this. Actually, you can put this on and off and compare tracks directly to your bus, your mix bus, versus the return from Spat. And we're actually going to do this. Returning what? Well, binaural audio, returning a channel-based arrangement, 712, 916, or for that matter of fact, returning ambisonic and bouncing ambisonic, or printing, I should say, ambisonic. So this is the integration with the audio pass. This is what we're going to be actually doing today in 2 seconds. Good. Spat plugin, because yes, I've just talked about this Spat send, this Spat return. What's the story with those plugin? Well, we'll make it quite clear to you with this one. So Number one, well, first of all, we're in Pro Tools. We're talking about AX native. We're not doing this in AX DSP for the extract of the audio. So these are native plugins to understand. And there's three plugins. Number one, the Spat Sand, and it's responsible for sanding the audio and the automation of all these sources, objects. Again, me with the both names. So that's our first plugin. The second plugin to deal with, the Spat Return, which returns the audio and for the automation of what we call the masters, in the in Pro Tools. And last but not least is Spat Room. And Room is not for audio routing; it's strictly for the control, the automation for the room reverberation, changing reverb parameters, driving the level and so on and so forth. Basically, it's the control of what we call a room. A room for us, it's a bus. It's basically a bus. Okay. Now, important little star there. Yes, native RM, where I was actually just testing it again. We've been on it for a few months here. It's actually coming. Let's call it, target is July 14th for actual beta public of this ARM native, so universal binary, both for the Spat plugin and the Spat application. Now, today I'm running on an Intel machine. I was running yesterday. I actually did that test, build the session on an ARM environment and moved it to an actual Intel to see how that was going. So, are we good? Yeah, we are good. Well, let's dive. Let's dive. So we're going to be diving with what? We're going to be diving with, as I was talking, Akagera. I'm going to be bringing those tracks, this content into Pro Tools, and we'll actually going to be able to start to play and start to integrate this. So, okay, Pro Tools, here we are. Pro Tools, typical dashboard. You actually see here some templates. And yes, we supply a bunch of templates, but we're going to start from raw right now because I want you to appreciate the simplicity of building something, not being imposed by a template. But as things are getting more complex, yes, you definitely want to consider the actual template. Okay, so we're just going to go for a Akagera start here. And let's do that. Okay. Goods. Let me just open the windows, make sure you guys are all seeing this nice and clean. Yeah, it looks good. Okay, so we are in Pro Tools, nothing specific. I have installed those plugins. We'll look at this at the end. We are there, we are raw, we are ready to start. I'm going to be simply here taking the actual Akagera tracks. I'm going to drop them in the actual Pro Tools in a second. Here we are, kick, and trombone, and stuff, and go. Boom. Okay, so here we are. We have these tracks as further show, right? They are in our session. Let's just look at the mix window. There's the mix window, right? Quite simple. Now, the typical scenario, right, would be to send those to an actual mix bus. And we're going to be doing this right now if we want, right? We can actually, as simply of this all the way to here. Little shortcut that we like, which is Option Shift. And we're going to be sending this to a new track, and an aux input will work for me. And we're just going to start with stereo to make it simple. We're going to call this the mix. So what I just did here, I multi-selected the track, say send me all this to the mix. Voila. Yeah, why doesn't it put it in order? I know this. Voila. Now it's order. So, right, we could see everything is going to the mix. The mix is going to output 1 and 2. Let's see if I play this. Is there something happening? It should actually happen. Yep. All right, we have some raw audio going on there. From that session. Okay, so we have audio, right? The audio of the mix. This is the mix. Nothing is panned. You can see here that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 mono tracks, and we actually have 2 stereo tracks. Now, let's talk about this, and let's talk about instantiating the plugins. Let's talk about instantiating the plugins. So a few ways to go with this. You can obviously, simply actually insert a plugin on a track, and the plugin is found in the sound field and call for the Spat Sand plugin. Obviously, that's a simple way to do it. It gets instantiated, but if you have to do this, well, now it's 8 times, or it's not too bad, but if you have to do this 30 times, you may find it not the best way. Now, another possibility, and we could actually choose here all the mono tracks. Sorry for this. All the mono tracks, snare. Marimba LCR. Yes, we had 3 microphones on the marimba, and we have a trombone. So now multi-selecting those, again, if I click the option Shift and actually go on Insert, now I'm going to be able to insert these on all the plugins at the same time. So I'm choosing, you know, the Spat Revolution Send, holding the commands, and here we are. So these mono instances are all done right away. Appreciate the fact that the name of the track is actually found in the plugin, so it took the name and it's going to be passing it to Spat Revolution. Makes it very, very simple. And we were kind of done in the sense that we just need to activate the local audio path, which I'll talk in 2 seconds, and we are actually ready to send to Spat. Now let's do this for our 2 stereo ones if we don't want to be missing them. Same story there, multi-selecting in the stereos, and actually send to Spat Revolution on the stereo. Et voila. Now we're going to need to activate the local audio. That's the only bit and piece that we need to do to be ready to go. And ultimately, yes, we need to return this. Well, let's start to talk about this little local audio feature. It's right there, right? We can engage them. And thanks to the control shortcut, right? CTRL control shortcut, we can actually enable all of them at the same time. Now, I'm most probably going to enable, yeah, they're all there. All my stereos are there as well. Yeah, so everything has been activated. We'll see this in Spat Revolution in a second. We are done. These tracks are activated. I will talk about automation in 2 seconds. And kind of walk you into the steps, a few things that are important to know. Now, on the return side, on the mix, we're going to be replacing that mix, what you were listening to, by an actual return. Again, inserting, in this particular case, we'll insert not a send, but a return. And we've got a returning plugin that's called the mix. Yes, and we could have called it 712 or binaural, obviously, if you want to identify things. But I was going very simple. Last piece here, we're going to be activating this local audio path. Let's just see what our corresponding Spat Revolution is doing. And before we get back to this, let's just see what's going on. And yep, okay. I'm just going to minimize this. And what you actually can see in the Spat Revolution software is all these sources have actually appeared right there for you. So is the actual return. So we're actually ready to connect to get some audio going, as simple as this. And while we are there, well, why not do it? So you can actually see here the inputs. These are the sources. We call them basically, if you select on them, audio pipe inputs, right, from that software. This is software inputs and the hardware inputs. We're going to be connecting those into what we call a room. So we can add them manually, but I'm going to show you another trick to make it simpler. And there's actually the return here, the output, which was going to be going back. If we actually do Shift A, Command A, or basically multi-selecting everything, we have the ability to actually use the Command L, which is right there, Connect Selected, and it's actually creating all the environment. Inputs, feeding and creating these sources, and then feeding an actual room master. Basically, this is where the reverb engine, this is the mix environment. It by default chose it to be stereo. We're gonna right away deliver you in binaural. So what I did there, I selected there the inspector on the right side, allow me to change the stream type to binaural audio versus channel base or other type of stream types. We'll get back into this in a second. And we are, and it's returning. So maybe we want to confirm this. Let me just organize the windows in Nundo. Sorry, did I say Nundo? Uh-oh. I hope there's no Avid guys on the phone making fun of me for mentioning the devil. Mentioning the devil. Okay. So, and what we can actually do here is actually double click on the actual room itself right there. Double click there, or actually just access it up there. And we are into this room. You actually can see the tracks with all their names. The objects are there. And let's just test. Yep, and we appear to have sound, and we are going into Spat. And this is where it all starts, right? This is where it all starts. We can maybe pick up this part there. We've got this overhead. So you see, basically, I actually didn't do anything. Well, yes, I did move a few objects in the space, but you already could feel the reverb engine. Why this is? Because the reverb engine is always activated by default all sources object. Now, you're not obliged to. Actually, if we were to select one of those sources and double click on it, you can see the panel, appreciate the panel showing up on the bottom. And on this panel, it's right there for you. This is the reverb. I could disable the reverb, you know, for each of those, or again, these good old, you know, Command A, the Command A feature in, well, now I'm in Windows environment, but yes, whatever equivalent is in Windows. If I'm multi-selecting everything and I'm killing the reverb, well, there's no more reverb, and let's listen to this live. I can actually just mute the overall reverb for that matter of fact. Okay, so we have hours of fun to actually start to build something, you know, strictly there. Maybe I want you to appreciate a bit with the distance attenuation model. We'll do this on the actual trombone in 2 seconds. And we're actually going to start thinking about, well, how do we are going to be automating this, right? How are we going to tie all this, you know, together so, you know, we have basically a scene and we have some automation, we have some movements, maybe a reverb, you know, volume changes at some point, maybe sources mutes, unmutes. There's a variety of automation what we want to be doing. So kind of two ways to approach, you know, automation. I mean, you could decide basically just to automate a single, you know, parameter, and that's a great way to do it, and that's what we're going to look at. Parentheses there, we do have a snapshot system, preset system. I mean, snapshots are very popular in live production. Why do I say this? Because this is quite practical, because if we're actually deciding to create a snapshot, this is scene 1, this is song number 1, right? We can have a song to song actual scene, a start point, ensuring that all parameters are loaded. And why is this important? Well, it ensures a start point, and then the automation just gets done only on that actual, you know, parameter that needs to change. Maybe one movement, so we'll be moving an X or a Y or an azimuth or a distance parameter, not necessarily having to save everything. You could still obviously decide to save every single parameters. It makes it heavier, but yeah, that is possible. So yeah, so we can actually simply do this. So this is a start point for that song, and well, maybe I want to actually compare, you know, with if I actually do a few movements there to see if this is better. You know, maybe I want to decide that this is my, you know, my second scene. And this is very practical just for rapidly auditioning, right? I press the new snapshot button. This is snapshot 2. And I can rapidly alternate from number 1. I say rapidly. There is a crossfade right now because we like crossfades. I can actually make this 0 just to show you what it does without it. Boom. So we're just snapping to these two scenes. Let's do this with some audio, and then we'll start to play with the trombone a bit, and then we'll get some automation going. There's our trombone here. Right, this is what I'm talking with distance attenuation. kind of see what's going on with this. Quite simple, you know, to understand. Our distance of the object brings some attenuation. Obviously, the reverb, the room is more present. So maybe we want to actually automate this parameters, this distance parameter. And let's talk now about automation. That brings us to the subject. Let's move to Pro Tools here. I'll go on the mix windows. So people in automation in Pro Tools are used to this actual automation dialog. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to right click on the plugin and choose the automation dialog. And what we actually see here is all the parameters that can be automated in Spat Revolution on the send, so on the source. So this is heavy, long list. So let's pick up azimuth, elevation, distance. Just for now, we did this on the kick right now. And I'll talk about how to enable this in multiple ones in a second. Let's actually do it on the trombone, our trombone number 8 here, automation dialog. And let's actually go for azimuth, elevation, distance, all there. So we've actually added these parameters. So we're going to be able to write. Let's get back to the edit window. We see the edit window. We have the trombone that's right there. We did activate the actual the parameters for automation, and that would mean that we can actually could go in write mode. Go in write mode, and I'm going to be expanding automation, and you could see that we can actually have a look. Let's look at the distance one, for example, and I can even confirm that I have some control. Right, if I do this, I'm actually writing right now. Yeah. So right, you saw the object move back, you know, and actually is in the way of moving away. We're going to undo this automation. Voila. And we're going to be this time writing the automation because maybe that's what we want to do, right? We want to do the movement with the Spat remote. Maybe we do it with Yukon, for that matter of fact, moving that parameter with an encoder, with the fader. Could be the mouse, various ways to move that object. But if we decide to do so, if we enable the actual automation to a write mode, for example, and we decide to play. And as you can see, this automation was written for us. If I actually, you know, move on the timeline, you can actually see it. Okay, and now we wrote the distance. We actually wrote some stuff on automation as well. If we go on azimuth as well, there's a slight movement left-right there that's going on. Everything was written. Well, not everything. Azimuth, elevation. If we are to do elevation, same deal. Right now we have nothing going on with elevation, but we could decide on the second automation pass, for example. Right, on this second pass, I've added the elevation. I did manipulate it in Spat because I find it quite practical. You may find different ways. And now for you to appreciate the elevation, let me give you an actual better view for this. Better view for this, and let's see what's going on. Okay. Making sense? Quite simple there. We've got automation going. We could write. We chose which automation parameters we wanted to do. Now, Hugo, you've done this on trombone. Do I have to do this on marimba, on vibra, overhead, and on everything? The answer is no. There are some tricks. Now, I'll show you kind of my way of dealing with the Spat Send plugin. I've showed you to instantiate all of them at the same time, you know, with the control shortcut or the option shift shortcut, multi-selecting. The challenge with this is the following. Well, the settings are, for the automation, for example, even your local audio path is actually, you know, needs to be set for each of them. So one way to actually deal with this, and this is actually works for mono and stereo as well, that I find. Let's forget that first row for the moment. Let's do another row as Spat Send to explain the concepts. If I instantiate strictly one on the kick, And let me, for that matter of fact, close all the audio, right? All in red. These are actually gone for now. They've been disabled. They've been disabled on the local audio. So I instantiated one on the kick. This is our plugin. Works the name kick. I can activate local audio. Local audio appears. I can set my automation dialog. Okay, Hugo, what are you going to want to be doing to automate, for this particular mix that you're working? Azimuth, elevation, distance. Maybe I want yaw, pitch, roll. I mean, you can actually include, as much as you want. You can actually put everything. Obviously, understand that everything you do, you're muting temporary something. Well, it's going to get ridden, so it gets a bit more challenging than to target. And this is the whole idea there. But yeah, you can maybe choose the reverb. You could choose as much. The presence factor is actually a very interesting one. We have the omni gain and so on and so forth. I'm not going to go through all the settings, but let's say that this is the automation, parameters that I want to have. I actually, I've set it. And now, if I remember correctly, holding the actual option and check what's going on with Spat on the other side, right? I'm holding option, dragging, and you see what happened? Kick is there, snare is there. Now stereo, because I've copied the plugin into a stereo track, it made a stereo send and another stereo for the vibraphone, marimba mono, marimba, 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 and trombone, and here we are. We're back to the same point there, but we've done our automation dialog. Automation parameters are set. The local audio path, we don't need to kind of go back there. We've set it once. This is it, and we go. That's it. We can take these, and we can get rid of those. We don't need those for that matter of fact. And just basically connect this there. We have our scene. Everything was resetted. Yes, indeed, everything was resetted because I've deleted the actual source objects in Spat. We have sound. And we do. Okay, let me just check if my friend online here, Arsène Le Monde de Dayo. Hello, Hugo, Sébastien. Bonjour, Jean-Sébastien. Yeah. Already some questions. Well, actually, let me maybe, take a bit of break. Well, already 45 minutes in. Those are crazy. We try to keep them 45 minutes to an hour. It's going to go a bit beyond. That's okay. We're going to make it fun. We'll take the time to make sure everyone is alive. Arsène says Jean-Pascal. Well, Jean-Pascal is in Montreal. I assume it would be possible to use routing folder instead of aux tracks completely. This is the next session, Jean-Pascal. I'll briefly show a template towards the end of the webinar about using routing folders, which are basically routing folders are aux tracks. You say instead of, but they are considered aux track, but they offer many advantages, better structure for a large session. You'll see this in the template. Good point. Today we're going simple. I really want to say, hey, we want to make sound. I've got 30 tracks, 40 tracks. I'll open a session with 40 something tracks there. It's in binaural. I'm mixing binaural. I'm mixing 712 and call it a day. We've got some people from DID Tech. So Jean-Pascal Montreal, DID Tech in France. Hello, guys. Sébastien, thanks for joining. Merci de joindre à nous. Bob. Hello, Bob Katz. Oh, we have some great visits. I don't know where you basically live, Bob. When it's over, it would be great to get a link to the playback in an email. Thanks. Yes. Of course, that session, if you're referring to this, that webinar will be online, remains online. This is what we do those. We do them live. We don't expect, necessarily, hundreds of people on the live. We do it live because we can get this dynamic with users. But at the same time, it becomes content available on the chain, and we do those on a regular basis. Well, thanks for joining, Bob. Great, great to see you here. We'll get back into our conversation. Let's just actually move back to the little deck there for a second, making sure that we are in good shape. Okay, so this was Akagera kind of getting, started on the conversation. What are we going to do now? Well, we're going to kind of review what we've talked about here on the simple session, okay? Just a kind of a brief review of the kind of the key subjects and the elements to keep, to remember. So yeah, we insert on the track, we assign them to a mix bus. That was quite simple to understand. We insert the span send on all the tracks instances, right? So first of all, we obviously insert the tracks, but insert the span send on all the track instances that we want to send. And here I'm focusing on sending everything, right? And if everything is sent, everything is in sync, everything is aligned, and it's all there. You don't need reverb, you mute, you remove the reverb on those elements. Maybe you don't want some on the kick, and yeah, you can obviously remove that. You decide. Je suis en Florida. Oh, in Florida. Great stuff, Bob. I just saw this pass. So the Spat actual thing. Now, do you saw the deal there? I don't want to do this 20 times. Multi-select the tracks, hold Shift plus Option to insert the plugin everywhere. People in Pro Tools like Hugo, I know this, but anyway, I'm just taking the time to remind people. And then the Control click will actually enable all the local audio pass. Very simple. Make sure to set the dialogue, because if someone here from Pro Tools, Avid, or anyone knows how to actually set automation dialog for all instances in one shot, please let me know, because I haven't found what that is. And this is why I set the dialog, the automation dialog, which parameters first. And then, yes, I use this option that I showed you. Make one local audio enabled, automation dialog, exactly what I want, and then I copy, right? I hold Option and drag, and as you saw, mono, stereo, and that could be an LCR, an ambisonic, a source, boom, 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 and they appear, so it's kind of rapid to do it this way, I believe anyway, so it's been working for me. Okay, and then ultimately we're going to be inserting on the Spat return. We've done this. This is how you were listening. Actually, if we go back to it very rapidly, let's just take this one here. Voila. All right. What was this, Hugo? Well, this was me simply disabling the return from Spat and comparing the mix bus, which are those tracks feeding that mix bus, versus what's going on in Spat, right? Kind of a quick switch. You obviously saw there was different, reverb was there. There's obviously, there's no placement yet, and there is no panning anyway in Pro Tools. So yeah, just to kind of review this with you guys, okay? So we insert the return. Where are you, deck set? Oh, there you are. And last but not least, well, we can decide to change that mix bus, and I'll show this to you, right? It's okay, we've decided it was stereo, but we actually want to create something larger. There's actually ways to do this. It will only mean that you'll need to reinstantiate the return, right? It won't actually switch it automatically. This is what I've discovered anyway with that trick in Pro Tools. If I go Pro Tools, back to Pro Tools and Spat right here, so you see what's going on, right? So this actual mix here, if I right-click on this, I could choose to change the track width. And let me do this together with you so you understand. Hey, Hugo, how do we make a 712, return from Spat? Or you know what? I'll pick a 916, thanks to the new 916 and Pro Tools now. So if I'm changing the mix bus width to actually... and the Spat return remained there. I thought it was not doing it. Is it? Let's go see. And actually, we'll do better than this. We'll rename this to 916 bed. Yes, so 916 bed. There's a Spat return. So it remained there. It renamed it. Let's see what it did in Spat. That's the most important part there. Well, look at that. Basically, change the track width, and now we have a 916 return. Now, there's only binaural audio room there. What we'll do is we'll change this stream type to a channel-based system. We're going to go... Do I have a 916? No, I haven't copied it. Well, fine. Do I have something? What do I have? It doesn't really matter at this point. Let's just call it a 714. I could call it a 712. So yeah, basically that's 712, 714 Atmos, which, would most probably want to do a 712 there, but a 714, whatever it is for that matter of fact, is feeding back into Spat this time. So we've basically, whatever scene was there, now there was no scene really, I deleted the scene, but right, let's say that this is our scene. Whatever scene that we had created remains there, right? So this binaural mix that we were preparing is now on a channel-based system with a matter of a click. Now I can even show you how to do multiple rooms in Spat Revolution. But let's just play this. Is there something going on? Did I break something? Oh, I'm back at the beginning of the session. That's why. Okay, what's going on here? Oh, I maybe broke something there. But anyway, we don't need to spend too much time on this. This was kind of just me showing you the ability to change rapidly this return element there, okay? So voila. So we've actually now moved on to a 714, a 916, or whatever delivery, increasing the track width, getting a bigger return, okay? Good stuff. Let's get back to it if we want to be... If we want to be done eventually. There's always a lot of content to talk about, and this is great, obviously, but you want to keep them fairly focused. Okay, so we are good with this. Let's do it. Well, let's actually listen rapidly to another little something here. We're going to be listening to something that was done in Spat Revolution. Mix and binaural by Kellen, a friend of mine, he's been working on a session, binaural mixing. He's trying to mix something for live reproduction as well. So it's been part of a process for him of finding from studio to live. So we can have a quick look at this session there to see, how it looks and how it feels. So we're going to be I'm going to be closing the actual sessions that we're working on. And you see I just closed, you have not seen it there, but as soon as we close the session, Spat is no longer basically connected to these audio devices. Okay, so let's take a quick listen and have a look of what he's actually dealing with. Aha. Just opening the session. Okay, so here we are. We've just opened this Pro Tools session. There is a bunch of tracks on it. If I actually play it, nothing is going to play for now, and that's normal. If we actually look at the mixer, another bunch of tracks. There's vocals, there's drums. There's quite a bit of elements there, and he is actually returning in this particular session a binaural audio, which obviously won't return right now. If we move to the actual Spat side. If we bring the Spat side in the equation, what I'm going to be doing here, and you see everything appeared, all these objects. Oh, Hugo, why is everything in red? Well, I did this on purpose. Limitation of Spat Essential versus Spat Ultimate. So Spat Essential limits you to 32 objects, so I'm going to need to change rapidly the licenses to enable it all. So let me just do this in the back. And get voila. Okay. And now we are on the ultimate version, so I'll be able to see that nothing is limited by it. Voila. I'm going to open the session. So when you are dealing with this, right, you end up with a Pro Tools session and an actual session, what we call a JSON file. This is the Spat session, and I'm going to open this one. The track is called Never Settle. I'm going to open this and be able to play that one. Take a bit of time to open. In his session, actually, what he had done is he had the binaural, which is right here, the return from Spat. He had the stereo, which was just a panning on all these audio tracks, so you could compare kind of the stereo bus, if you want, of Pro Tools. And he had a reference here, which was the actual mix, the mix that was released by the artist. As simple as this. Cowbell. It's stuck on the cowbell. More cowbell, Hugo. It's coming up. There's actually a few rooms as well. You'll appreciate what we've been working on this session. They're talking about actual multiple simultaneous returns. Now, do we leave it load? It's coming. Oh. Hello. Sometimes we have to be patient. Well, I'm going to go back to this for a quick second, let it load in the back. It's loading up. Ah, there it is. Now that I click, it's actually back with me. Okay, so here we are. So it basically tells me right now, oh, by the way, you have what we call deactivated blocks, but you have ultimate version. You can enable them. Yes. So I've opened a session. So the trill here and the dynamic to understand is these blocks, if you are limited by the version, the session is still compatible with the ultimate version. And now it just asks me to re-enable, activate basically these blocks, okay? So everything is actually activated. I've got now multiple returns, and we'll talk about this right after that. We'll just take a quick listen. We've got multiple returns, multiple buses, a binaural bus. This is a WFS system. We're actually going to working on a studio setup, custom studio setup. This is another actual setup there. So these are actual speaker setups. And as you can see, there were speaker setups, custom speaker setups we were experimenting. And for now, we're going to be actually exploring the actual binaural. Goods. Okay, let's try that as a play. Yes, it does. All good. Hold on, baby, we can turn it around. I never ever meant to let you down when you cried, and I cannot deny there's a storm inside your eye. I'll never settle. Can I level? I will bet. I won't give up on this feeling. We can make it. It's that easy. And we can be going for hours and hours. So yes, this is a start session. Bunch of audio elements, stereo elements, mono elements. He's kind of building an environments here. Yeah, a soundscape literally with reverb engine all tied together. There's no external reverb, by the way. There may be some track with some reverb elements, but there's actually no, reverb. This is just, a bunch of mono and stereo stems. Spat is doing the rest of the equation. Good, good. Okay, let's move on. Time is flying as usual. Let's get back to the deck set here quickly and get on with the last piece of the subject so we kind of wrap all this in our heads together. Goods. Well, thanks for Kellen for sharing this. So automation there. Just quick point on the automation conversation. And there actually is automation in the session. I don't know if you saw them moving, but maybe I was not playing at the right place. So by default, important to understand that we actually record and play back in the azimuth elevation distance. We do not use both what we call positioning system, right? So we actually deal with AED, azimuth elevation distance, and we deal with XYZ. That's the beauty of Spat. It has both actually has both positioning or system. Now automating both, you understand that you'll be fighting, right? XYZ moving, azimuth elevation, and distance moving. So we typically choose one or the other. By default here, we're R and AED every single time in Spat, but we can actually decide to activate the Cartesian mode, and that can be engaged, and I can show you rapidly how to engage this if we get back to Pro Tools and we take an actual plugin. In the actual plugin here, you can see here position mode it's actually in polar, but it can be switched to Cartesian. And it can be only for one plugin if you want to have a different reading and recording position mode, but by default it is polar. Little parenthesis on that one. Oh, and one thing that I did not do, but I guess, it could be interesting to actually have a look at if that's working. Yeah, right. So yeah, I do actually have the ability to use Yukon controller in that particular session. What I wanted to show you there, as we're talking automation and controlling parameters, if I actually choose the insert of that kick drum, for example, and I click on the Spat sand, well, there you see me controlling the actual azimuth of the kick drum. In this particular case, the elevation. Obviously, these can be mapped to an S3, an S6, an S4, a S1, I should say, another great one. But yeah, so this is Avid control, controlling the actual parameters. So you could be manipulating for that, writing that automation. Again, X, Y, Z, or Cartesian. Okay. Good stuff. Let's move on. And we have some question, and we're just about to get in the Q&A, so that is perfect. Limitation, quick parenthesis for limitation here. We ate limitations. I love being able to do whatever I want. Sorry, unless that was changed recently. Pro Tools is pre-fader insert only. What does that mean for my life, Hugo? Well, that means that basically you're going to be losing your solo, your mutes, and your fader control in Pro Tools, right? You're sending pre-fader. It's not going, the fade is not going to the fader. It's been sent to Spat beforehand. So now this is maybe a challenge because it is a workflow change. You're used to, these faders that are mapped, and thanks to Jean-Pascal, yeah, sorry. It was Jean-Pascal that mentioned earlier, yes, aux is why use aux and routing folder, and we'll talk about this in the next session. But yeah, so that is a reality, is that if we are taking the send directly on the audio tracks, it can be a challenge because, yeah, you're losing this ability. Now, a lot of users like to work entirely in Spat, right? You don't actually need those faders necessarily. You can map all the parameters of Spat to faders to whatever. So you could be using the solo in Spat Revolution. You saw me solo stuff. You can use and automate what we call the mute and the enable. You can control that mute parameter of any object. So it can be automated, can be controlled. And for that matter of fact, you can actually control the amplitude by actually moving the object position, right? As you saw me, this attenuation, natural attenuation that was happening. So the position becomes that control in Spat Revolution. As simply as this. And there's another parameter called the presence, which ultimately is, the ability to control the dry sound. And there is an actual gain as well. As you saw, there's a bunch of gain in Spat Revolution, right? And last but not least, this is kind of all tying the kind of complete perceptual model. No, not against, these concept of using, faders and a DAW. But I'm just saying, as all as this is kind of tied in together, this amplitude control with object position, the presence parameter, it's kind of nice to be kind of working within Spat for that matter of fact, instead of driving faders the typical way that we've been doing it. Anyway, we're not trying to impose an actual change. I'm saying this is a limitation, but there is a solution for this. It's not that there's no solution. Today, I'm not focusing on this. I want to show you the simplicity to have fun, an hour of fun of mixing stuff in Spat, taking advantage of the beautiful reverb, the perceptual factors. This was all the concept there. The alternative is what? And we're going to be covering this only in the next session. And it's to actually use aux tracks as objects, or I should say, aux tracks or routing folders. Sorry. Yeah, so aux tracks or routing folders. So basically your auxes tracks are becoming your objects, right? So 50 aux tracks, they're 50 objects, they're object 1 to 20 or 50. It's the Dolby workflow, right? Those are objects basically, and that gets sent. So it's the same kind of concept there. And when we do this, the advantage, we can have multiple tracks, right? Vocal 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever, multiple vocal bits and pieces, all actually routed to this one, which make more sense, right? We may have bits and pieces. We're all not collapsing, but yes, summing into a single object. Well, yes. And maybe this is a drum stereo mix that you have all the drum elements tracks sending to a actual stereo aux for your stereo drum or whatever that drum, bed is. So yes, it definitely makes more sense, as we grow, and we'll look at this, as I said, in the next webinar. We have templates for this. You've seen that when I've opened Pro Tools earlier, a template was proposed. We can look at one quickly, and then we move to the Q&A. And yeah, as I said, advanced kind of workflow. And part of these advanced workflow is what? Is these multiple simultaneous return. Hugo, how do I deal with this? How I make sure it's all synchronized properly? Again, we're gonna kind of talk about this in the next session. But yeah, multiple return is yes, the bed mix and maybe a binaural, and by the way, I say bed mix. You're not limited to what Pro Tools offer for buses. You can obviously return them in a bunch of monos, or a bunch of stereos, or a bunch of blocks. There's various ways to deal with it, and our templates kind of show this as well. Recurrent, obviously, binaural for monitor, virtualization, binaural monitoring, return actual, other mixes, a binaural synthesis, other beds, a 5.1, a 7.1. You can have all these delivery simultaneously being bounced, being print, being baked, right? And binaural non-bisonic is another one. Okay. You know what? I think the time is flying. I'm going to respect the time of everyone and try to wrap this. Anyway, the subjects that I was kind of starting to dive in here is really for the next webinar. So we're going to kind of stop at this point. Yeah, sorry for this. We're going to kind of stop at this point there. And, so in the next webinars, we're actually going to see how the configuration gets a bit more complex with multiple returns. And we're going to be talking as well about, these template files that exist to make your life simpler. We have 6, 7, 8 of them. I'm going to show them to you in 2 seconds. Important to understand the limitations. We've got 2 versions, Essential, Ultimate. I briefly mentioned it. 32 audio channel on the Essential. Single room active at the time. Doesn't mean that you can't deliver multiple renders, but there's only 1 room at the time available. I could do binaural up to 16 speakers, so 916, and ambisonic third order. So really taking care of, some good deliverables there with ambisonic third order and up to 916. And in all cases, you can always use binaural monitor. So 916, you're in the plane, you're on the road, you can binaural monitor what you're creating to, let's say, a 916 bed. Ultimate channels are pretty much limited by hardware. We have multi-room environment and the long list of other features that Ultimate has. It's basically cracked open to all the possibilities, but the sessions are compatible. You start with 1, you increase the bigger license for 1 month, and you can go down back to the Essential bit because your needs are changing. This is all possible. Sessions are always the same. Okay. Briefly on the licenses, Spat Revolution licenses, perpetual licenses, 1 year support and upgrade, subscription. There's a monthly rent to own, monthly rent to own, yearly educational pricing, institution bundles. We kind of have tons of flexibility on that front. And now we jump on the Q&A. My friend Arsène is there. You can still hear me. Say hello to me without talking to me. I'm not saying I want to hear you. I can hear your voice. You can say hello. Are you there? You can say hello to everyone.
Hey.
You are there. Okay, well, let's switch to some questions. Feel free to talk if you want. I'm assuming people can hear you. So what we have, Bobcats. I don't understand how you prevent double listening of the source tracks as they are still feeding the mix bus. Yeah, good question, Bob. Basically, they're still feeding the mix bus, but the content of the mix bus is being overridden. So the Spat plugin, actually, if we rapidly go on it, if we go back on this here, and this is the session. If I go on this binaural plugin right there, you see here, enable the local audio pad for the binaural return and override the content. So it's overriding it, okay? So it takes basically over. The insert brings back the audio from Spat, okay? And basically overrides what was coming to this bus, okay? Doesn't let the signal that comes in come true. It takes whatever comes from Spat. Now, when I actually disabled it earlier, this is why we're able to go from going back to ear, the content that's being sent to that bed and not the content from Spat, okay? Hope this makes sense, Bob. Other question here. Chengshu, greetings. How do you differentiate between bed and object if every source requires Spat sound? They will all be showing in the master return module. Correct. Yes. So this is kind of people, going around the Dolby object world. As I mentioned at the beginning, we are not trying to replace, we're not trying to replace, sorry for that, I'm just going to put this here. And we're not trying to replace, the Dolby Atmos objects. They are what they are. They have the power of, of what they offer. Obviously, being able to be rendered later in an object-based deliverable workflow, and that is still something that you could use. What I am mentioning here is we really were using Spat to create these beds, and we have been seeing a lot of tendency right now on looking at Dolby Masters ADM files. People are actually creating 916 beds, and we've even seen people create larger beds and actually declare those as static objects. So not necessarily using, the object dynamically, but using the bed. So this is what we could do. So we bring a reverb engine to Dolby Atmos creation to create beds, 712 beds, to all the way to whatever. Understanding Dolby has some limitation, but we're not trying to replace the Dolby object. Now, the object that goes through Spat, yes, they bring the perceptual model. Yes, they bring the reverb engine. They bring everything, but we can't deal with these objects. There's this kind of proprietary way. So I hope that answered the question. I assume you could return the binaural output to the track instead of a knock, so you could record it. Does it have to be done in real time? It has to be done in real time, Bob. Yes, for sure. There's no offline. Oh yeah, it can get long, but hopefully everything goes well. So yes, it is an online render that needs to happen. Yes. You could returning to a track instead of a aux. Well, I typically return it to an aux, which is the aux that actually feeds the track. So for that matter of fact, if you look at when we're looking at the session here, does he have this in his session? Well, he has a print, you see, so we're returning somewhere, but he has actually a track, an actual audio track to actually print it, bake it. So, yeah. And the only thing to understand in this particular case, and the reason we're using an actual aux or a mixed track, is that there's some important routing to be respected. It's not the subject of today, and is the subject when we have larger multiple returns. And for today, right, all audio tracks were feeding a mix bus, and we were replacing that mix bus, and everything was going well. But there is some importance in the routing, which I'll cover in the next session, okay? So yeah, but typically you return to an aux, and then this is what you send to an aux, to an actual audio track to bounce it to. Thanks for that. So override means mute the output of the sends, means mute the output of the send. No, maybe I did not understand the question. The actual override basically means, so let's get back to the conversation, right? So all the, tracks that we put the signal are being sent to Spat, right? So Spat's receiving it, can process it. At the same time, the signal goes through the track as normal, and it feeds whatever bus that it was feeding. Where we're going to be playing the trick there is whenever we override the signal, so we put the return and we override the signal, right? Basically, whatever was going on that mix is no longer there because we overridden it by the Spat return. I hope I make myself clear. So this is what the override does, right? Just thinking it through here quite rapidly, right? Mix track, the mix, the stereo mix, the binaural, whatever, aux track, right? It's receiving signal from these audio tracks like normal, but whenever we put the plug-in there, the signal that's coming in is no longer actually, being let go through. It's being overridden by what's coming back from Spat and down. This is basically what's going on. I hope I made it clear. Be more than happy to have more conversation. At least you could punch into the binaural return track for a revision in real time to save time. Yeah, I guess we could take this conversation on the side, Bob. It's obviously interesting what you're mentioning. We could talk about this. I hope that I made a bit clearer there on the actual override conversation. Okay. Goods on the Q&A. No more question. Good crowd. You see, I was targeting for maximum an hour and 15 minutes. This is what happens with these sessions. But I hope that you guys enjoyed what we had for you guys today. Next webinars. Yes, there's more coming. July 19, we go deeper in this integration. We're going to talk about aux.io, bridge devices. So aux.io new feature 22.9 from Pro Tools, an actual routing folder. Jean-Pascal was mentioning a bit earlier. We're going to be talking about those specific. We'll talk about local audio path as well. We'll talk about local audio path and sync. So we're actually going to cover some of the more advanced, kind of complex subject on that next session. And we are going to have a Spat Revolution release webinar in August as we are releasing this new version, ARM native, so universal rebuild. Obviously, the ARM native plugins as well, not to have in Rosetta mode, not to have to run in Rosetta mode, okay? Where to find the information? Well, a bunch of information, spatrevolution.com, the demo trial, quick guide, user guide, a bunch of resources. I'll actually going to show you this as we wrap this up. Right, so if we actually this is right now some of the tech article. These are some of the tech article that we've worked on. The Spat Revolution, the Pro Tools one. There's actually a family. They are all right there in what we call the community technical articles. Bunch of articles that we publish, and yeah, there's a bunch with a little Pro Tools logo there. They cover some of the subject of today. So great way to review this, by the way. Important to understand that we actually have as well a complete user guide, that has a complete Pro Tools section, and I'll show you this, and it's actually right here. So this is the Pro Tools section with a bunch of information, kind of explaining the steps, and as I did not do all the steps, you may want to be reviewing this, and the tech article can be really, really good. This is actually what we call the resources, Spat Revolution resources, and here you can find all the templates, Steinberg templates. Oh, I mentioned Steinberg twice, again. Bad boy. Let me mention them all. Avid, Merging, Reaper, Ableton Live, Apple Logic. We've got a bunch of templates there in the Pro Tools or right there. You can download the complete bundle of 6 session templates in a zip package right there. So all the information descriptions are there. Goods. Yes. Well, and the Spat Revolution page itself. Last but not least, the Spat Revolution page contains a bunch of resources at the bottom. If I scroll down, you'll see user guide, link, quick guide, kind of a bunch of information, license activation information, latest release information. It's kind of all there. Well, we're going to be wrapping this up because if I don't wrap this up, I'll be going on all day and you guys will be fed up to listening to me if it's not already the case. So I'm going to wrap this up on a thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. If you actually want to take part of some conversation, we have what we call the Flux Immersive user group on Facebook. People are active, posting questions, challenges. Not a support line, but it's a first line, I would say, to actually connect with the community. Some people have experiences out there. Hope that you've enjoyed this webinar. I'm going to let you go on this note, and feel free to join the user community to ask more questions. And Bob, we can take this on the side or on the user community. This way, everyone gets to enjoy the answer. So thank you, everyone, for your time, and thanks for listening, and see you in 2 weeks on July 19 for the next part of Pro Tools integration.